Good afternoon, it's Pastor Aaron, and we're going to begin a Bible study on the book of Proverbs. Today we're going to be looking at verses 1 through 7 of chapter 1. By now you will have already received the email with the link to this video, and also attached to that email a document. This is a study guide so that you can kind of have some questions to reflect on as you study it on your own. So let's just go ahead and begin. Again, Proverbs chapter 1, and we'll just be doing the first 7 verses together here today. The Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance, to understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and the riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So right off the bat, from verse 1, we're told that at least this section of Proverbs that we're reading right now comes to us from Solomon, the son of King David. If you want to dig a little deeper on that, you can read about it in 1 Kings chapter 3. Solomon has a vision, a dream, where the Lord asks him what he would like. And instead of asking for riches or long life or revenge over his enemies, Solomon asks for wisdom to govern God's people. And this pleases God. And God promises him that he will give him understanding beyond any man who had come before him and beyond any man who would come after him. Pretty extravagant promise. So there's something to think about as we approach what we're reading today. So these are the Proverbs of Solomon. Now he says that the purpose of these Proverbs is to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. So let's think about each of those things for a moment. Wisdom, he says. The purposes of Proverbs is to give wisdom. Wisdom is not merely just head knowledge, nor is it merely just action, but it is knowledge of what is good that results in action that pleases God. Ultimately, that's what wisdom is. It is a knowledge that directs our lives to do what's right in God's sight. And so therefore, as he says, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, we can see that these things, righteousness, justice, equity, wise dealing, that is, wise actions, these are things that please the Lord. Consider what it means, righteousness. God is absolutely righteous, and in Christ, he's given you and I righteousness, so we have a righteous status before the Lord because of Jesus, and yet each one of us is walking in a path where we need to learn how to act like Jesus. And Proverbs says right from its start here in these verses we've just read that one of those purposes is to help us to learn righteousness. So we should learn a little bit about what the new man ought to look like as we read Proverbs. Justice. Honestly, you and I, as human beings, should find that our sense of justice has been skewed because of our sinful nature. Every aspect of our being, every aspect of our thoughts and our minds and our hearts and our imaginations is all tainted by the corruption of sin. And often we don't see it because our sense of justice is skewed. In today's passage promises us that one of the purposes of Proverbs is to help us to learn justice, equity. Equity is fairness. So learn how to be fair, learn how to be just, learn how to walk righteously before the Lord. He says one of the purposes is to give prudence to the simple. When he talks about a simple man, he's talking about someone who perhaps doesn't have a lot of experience and is easily deceived. So prudence is precautionary wisdom. All right, so it helps us to avoid making sinful choices. Ultimately, is what he's saying. And it says to give knowledge and discretion to the youth. So this is something that should be helpful for young people. To be young is by necessity to have not had as much experience as someone who is older. And so Solomon, as someone older, is sharing us godly wisdom. And if you're a young person listening to this, this is Solomon's invitation for you to take on the wisdom of God's people. He says to understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles. So he's saying, as we go through this book, we're going to find a lot of wise things written down in various forms. He says in riddles, so sometimes we're going to have to tease these riddles apart and figure out what he means. And in the end, he closes with this beginning of Proverbs, which really is a theme of the entire book, honestly, if you think about it. He says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So there's a contrast between the fear of the Lord and foolishness. And you're going to see that contrast throughout the book. In a lot of ways, he will contrast the wise person and the fool. And here he tells us that for the wise person, the beginning of knowledge, that is the beginning of the knowledge of what's right, the beginning of the knowledge that is not just merely head knowledge, but wisdom, the beginning of that wisdom is the fear of the Lord. And when he says the fear of the Lord, he's not talking about terror of the Lord. Terror is as though somehow we can't trust God. But he's talking about a fear that is a reverence of God's power and his might and his holiness that evidences itself in a willingness on our part to humble ourselves before him and respect him in all things. That is the fear of the Lord, to believe God is who he says he is and give him the proper place in our lives. That's the fear of the Lord. And he says that is the beginning of wisdom. So the beginning of wisdom is a willingness on our part to submit ourselves before God, before what he says, because of who he is. And the contrast to that is that the fool despises wisdom and instruction. And let's not just say, well, that's not me. All right? When we approach God and his word, it's a very important thing to recognize that each of us needs to humble ourselves before God, because each of us is a sinner. There is that part of our heart, each one of us, which is the fool, because we still have a fallen nature. So it's on us, as we hear the end of this proverb, to examine ourselves by it as well. The fool despises wisdom and instruction. So we need to be asking ourselves, do I despise wisdom and instruction? How do you respond when someone gives you advice you didn't want? How do you respond when someone says something that's true, but it makes you angry? How do you respond? It's easy to be defensive, isn't it? We all have ways that we act the fool when it comes to wisdom and instruction. So I guess what I'm getting around to here is, as we go through this book, don't just write off the fool as somebody else. ask yourself, in what way do I need wisdom? In what way do I need correction from the Lord? Well, I've also sent you the little study guide with some questions to think about. I hope this blesses you, and the Lord bless you. See you later, friends.